ready to cut, we can do the...
Crazy times, can't you feel it? Is there a reason for it all? Maybe take a ride on this pipe train.
Hey guys, what's up? Abby here from Safari Pedals. I am currently in Silverlake, LA with Mr. Adam Moseley.
Hi.
Hello, thank you for having me over.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here in my little studio.
I'm super excited to be here. Before we dive into the larger part of our chat, let's start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
I'm a music producer, engineer, and mixer. Also, I've become an educator, so I teach at UCLA's Herb Alpert School of Music and sometimes at Berkeley, Valencia in Spain.
Before we pop the camera on, we had mentioned that you have a class.
Yes, I do online mixing classes as well, which is really cool. It's really fun, small groups. Everyone in the class get to bring their own mix. I deep dive all the people on the course as well, deep dive their mixes and try and show them some tricks that will help them in their own mix.
I love that.
And you can find it on my website.
Will be in the description. Guys, in general, I'll link all of your social medias, links, everything will be down below so you'll know where to find all of Adam's work. So that will be there. Also, before we had popped the camera on, we had discussed a little bit your approach to music and mixing in general, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit.
My beginnings, I just knew I needed to get into a studio. I wanted to get into a studio. I was trying to make music, failing badly. I was reading the back of vinyl albums, and producer was always the big name on the back of the vinyl. So I thought, he must be the guy that knows. So I thought, well, I'll become one of them. You know, get into a studio, and then I'll be able to put a band together and become a rock star. But the minute I got into a studio, and I got in, it was Trident Studios in London. The minute I got in, which was the glorious position as a chef and construction worker, and then worked my way up eventually to being a T-boy, and then tape op, senior tape op, assistant engineer, started to engineer and co-produce and then produce. But that was my kind of like journey through. In those days, I started in 1978. There was never the time for anyone to sit down and teach you. This is a compressor, this is input, that is output, that's attack and release, that's what they do. You know, I happened to work with Mike Stone, who did the first 5 Queen albums, you know, and some of the first records I worked on with him was when Kiss did all their 4 solo albums. And it would be, Mike would say, put the 1176 on the bass, put the input at 11 o'clock, output at 1 o'clock, put the ratio, put button 4, and then it would be acoustic guitar. And I'd go 1176, he'd go LA2A. Set it up like this, and then it would be saturated guitars, and he'd say put the LA3 on, 3A on that. So there was never a way of saying, you know, let me sit you down and explain how these compressors sound different, or what they do, how they act slightly differently, how they EQ the sound and process the sound slightly, and the more that you increase the input or threshold, how they either boost or reduce certain frequencies. It was just a very organic way of, back then it was sit at the back of the room, STFU, don't say a word, just listen and try and learn, try and understand what's going on and try and figure it out for yourself. In that situation, I was at Trident originally from the day I got hired for £20 a week as chef in construction to when I left 4 years later. Trident actually closed and I left and moved to New York. But my whole process had been trying to understand what it is that people do. How do you make music? What is the role of the engineer? What is the role of the producer? In those first 4 years, I must have seen and worked on or assisted maybe 200 different producers or engineers, probably 200 different records in those first 4 years, some pretty major ones. And on each one, there was always someone that taught me or showed me what really works in the process of making music, and a lot of them showed me what doesn't work as well. How not to get a performance from an artist, how not to treat an artist, how not to talk to them, when to step up a little bit and motivate them, or if the band are messing around, how to tighten the discipline up a little bit, and when to almost be invisible and just let it happen, make sure the microphones are placed and that you record. So there was such a broad scope of different ways to make music. Back then I had the opportunity to learn and watch and assist and then engineer for some really legendary people and some that weren't quite so legendary. That helped me form my process of what are we doing here? What is the purpose of all of this? I felt is that making music, the process of it is to capture an emotion. So how do you create and capture an emotion that a songwriter is feeling when the song doesn't exist yet? So it comes down to choosing, well, what instruments are going to bring the right flavor? And then how are those instruments going to work in combination with each other? And what sounds will each instrument have? What notes do they play? Who plays what when? And the real essence of music production is about arrangement. It all comes down to arrangement. All the original music producers, from Phil Ramone, Arif Mardin, Tom Dowd, Quincy Jones, George Martin, all of these people who were really kind of like among the forefathers, Tony Visconti, all these incredible producers, Roy Thomas Baker, they all keep coming to mind now with Queen. They understood the art of arrangement. And it's not just the art of musical arrangement, of which instrument plays which notes at which time. But once you've worked out the musical arrangement, then it's the sonic arrangement. How do you paint the picture? Before you start a song, it's an empty canvas. So you're really choosing how many colors and textures you're going to use, how big a space the different sounds are going to take. I like to liken it to like a film or something. Who are your lead characters? Maybe you've got, in a song, you've got 4 or 5 lead characters or essential components, and the other sounds and elements are your supporting cast. Where do you even arrange them on the stage of that blank canvas? Who's going to stand that side and then balance it? Maybe you have one guitar the one side, one guitar the other, and they're playing slightly different parts and you feel a different energy. Or on verses, your track is arranged musically and sonically so that in your mix it's more mono in the verses, and maybe you're not using high frequencies. You know, maybe the guitars are playing a lower position, and then when you get to the choruses, it's pretty standard, you know, double cymbals on the drums, a splash of really high, aggressive, exciting frequencies fly in. Maybe you add acoustic guitars and double track them for the width on the chorus. So it's not just about the musical arrangement, it's choosing which instruments and what they play and when do they play that, and then how do you arrange it in your empty canvas.
I love the way that, like, you would also mention that you're a visual mixer, so it's so interesting to kind of hear you lay it out and really like see things like you said on a stage.
When I first hear a song, and it can be an artist sits down with an acoustic guitar or at the piano and they play me an idea for a song, I see it. I see the song. I see it in colors and shapes. Usually I already get the arrangement there and then. As they're going through, I'm thinking this part needs to be really minimal, intimate, and then the pre-chorus we can start to introduce some instruments, but maybe not loud, forceful parts, just to start to build it sonically with gentle parts, and then the chorus is going to explode, and the chorus will go wide, and we'll use all these different elements. And I get that picture in my mind of the shapes, their position, the perspective, whether they're far away or close, their width, the height or the depth. And then once I have that plan, it's about the process of let's achieve it. Because if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a concept, how do you know what you're trying to achieve? One question which I constantly hear is, how do you know when a mix is finished? And then usually the comments are, you never know, you know, or when you've released it, when it's on Spotify, or when you give up and you just put it out. But with any task, how do you know when you've achieved it if you didn't have a plan? If you're trying to make a dish, I got into a studio from cooking. So if you decide I want to make a spaghetti bolognese, you think, well, I need meat, I need pasta, I need a sauce, I need some herbs. I've probably got 30 different herbs in my kitchen. I don't go, all of these taste so good. I love the chipotle, I love the curry powder, I love the Chinese 5-spice, I love cumin. So I don't go and take all 30 spices out and measure exactly the same amount from each one and put them all into my dish thinking this will be the best thing ever because I love all of these spices. You know, if you do that, you're probably going to spit it out the minute you taste it. So in preparing anything, you have a plan, you decide these are the 5 ingredients that are going to make this dish. I don't need to add more stuff. I'm really focused, I'm clear about what I want to achieve. And making music should have that approach. if you really think about the song, absorb the song, communicate with the artist, make a safe space where they can tell you what was going on with the song. When the lyric or the feeling first came into their mind, it's always important for me to take them back into that moment, understand what was happening, and then I can think about how do we bring this through to life by choosing instruments that play notes and the sound of those notes and how those notes combine together. It's something I saw from some really good producers, you know, or really good artists. When I had to try and figure out, well, what is it that I do? What is music production? Is there a process? Is there an approach? And of course it's different for every artist. I've done records where I had to come up with every note and every sound and grab the record by its throat and force it through despite the band. If it was maybe, you know, there was a lot of friction in the band. Other records I've made, you just sit back, make sure the microphones are turned on, make sure you in record and don't interfere with what's naturally happening. So the scope of producing and capturing that sound of emotion is so broad, and it's often different strokes every time. I have my principles of have the vision, have a concept, see the mix, and then set about achieving it. But with every artist and every record, I have to go back to my starting point and think, what is this one about? What is this artist trying to communicate? And what can I bring to it? What will my role be in this? Maybe there's little, but there's a couple of areas that I can help with.
I love how the way that you've kind of painted it is the philosophy, it's very philosophical and principle based, and the way that I'm kind of absorbing what you said is that it allows you to be very versatile in the work that you do. It's kind of shifted my mind to what a producer is.
Yet I had no idea. I just knew that he was the big name on the back of a record, and I got my interview at Trident, and the studio owner said, you know, why did you write to us? And I said, I'd like to be a producer. Do you have any jobs going? And he laughed, and he said, do you know anything about the studio? I said no, and he said, well, a few people have done okay from here. Trident, I came in, the guys I learned from were the guys that did the White Album and Lou Reed's Transformer and David Bowie's first 3 albums with Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust, records which just years earlier had changed my life as a 11, 12, 13-year-old and so on. And here I was at 20 getting into the studio, and it turned out in the place where those records that had impacted me so strongly, sound-wise and emotionally, where those records were made. And that's when I realized I didn't actually want to be a rock star in a band. I actually realized this was my place. This is where I was meant to be.
Also to get to work with your heroes at such a young age, that I'm sure that was a whirlwind.
It was weird working with heroes, people that were instrumental in you being there in the first place. There's 3 people that made me want to do music or inspired me. One was my dad, who was a musician. Around 11 or 12, when I realized I wanted to play an instrument, there's a sax player who sadly passed called Michael Brecker. The first time I heard him, suddenly I heard the angels sing and the lights came on, you know, and there's this deep voice of Adam, you will play saxophone. That was because of Michael Brecker. And 7 years later, I worked with him for the first time on a Tina Turner album. Rightfully so, everyone was gaga about Tina Turner because she was just majestic. One of the most wonderful people ever to be in the presence of in terms of energy. But I couldn't see anyone because my eyes were misted up for 2 days. I was putting microphones up for Michael Brecker. I couldn't even see him because I had tears in my eyes for 2 days. So that was really important. And Hunky Dory, David Bowie's album, that came out, I think I was 13. And not just the message in the lyrics of that album, which are phenomenal. I recommend everyone to listen to Hunky Dory by David Bowie. The lyrics are just phenomenal. But that album was really so important to me growing up and in my life as an impact. A few years later, I was working with Mick Ronson, the guitarist. I mean, I say the guitarist. Mick Ronson was more than Bowie's guitarist. He was such an essential part of the whole Bowie journey and co-wrote the songs. He did the arrangements. Mick Ronson was just phenomenal, and years later I was working with him just on my own, and I couldn't believe it. But you couldn't be You know, when you're working with an artist, and if they're known and if they are important to you, you can't be a fanboy or a fangirl. You're in the studio with them, they're gonna try ideas, they're gonna mess up, they're gonna go to sing a note and the voice is gonna crack and not get it. They're gonna play flub notes when they're trying to do something. They just want to know that they can trust you, that in the studio you've got their back, that it's a safe space for them. They need to know that none of that outside world exists in the control room. It's just two people trying to make music. The artist trying to perform and the engineer or producer trying to be supportive and capture and create the environment for that person to feel free to make mistakes, to try ideas that don't work.
We had also spoken about it again before the camera popped on. Being originally from the UK, based in LA, how has that influenced the work that you do and kind of your approach as well?
I first moved to the US in 1981 to New York. I was born in Brighton on the south coast of England, moved to London to get into a studio. So I was very much more of a city kind of person. London to New York. I really wanted to find out why American records sounded so good. In the UK, often engineers had to work really hard to get good sounds. I had to be quite innovative and imaginative. I don't want this to sound disrespectful in any way, but suddenly I'd have a musician turn up in New York, a session player, and they turn up with all their equipment and their rack of effects, all their pedals, and basically give you, you know, they'd have the amp set up and give you a couple of cables and say, put a mic on it. And they had their sound down. Because in America, even in the 70s and 80s, schools had band, so people were learning technique, learning instruments. There were music schools and universities that did like modern music, popular music, not just conservatory, you know, classical music. So people could actually learn technique and learn to play their instruments. In England, from the engineers to the musicians, everyone was just making it up as they went along and fumbling their way around until they kind of learnt how to do it a bit and develop a method. So I think the English way was much more flying by the seat of your pants a little bit, make it up as you go along, much more experimental, because very few musicians had a kind of training in their instruments. Also, I think it's why in England there was so much originality in the music, because people weren't being trained.
At the sum up of every interview I've done, I've surprised the guest and asked a dumb question.
I was going to say there were no dumb questions, but try me.
I'll rephrase it. Not dumb, controversial.
Okay.
Okay. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
I don't eat ham, but I think with ham it probably does. Although I wouldn't ask for that in Italy.
Are you kind of leaning towards the firm on no?
Probably.
Okay.
I'm a bit on the fence on that because I've learnt not to be too rigid with anything. I think everyone should have the right to have pineapple on their pizza if that's what they want.
Basic rights, we're here for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go with that.
Government should not be telling you if you can have pineapple on your pizza.
Okay, we'll go with that. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me over. And guys, I wanted to say once again, all of Adam's links will be in the description. You know where to find all of his stuff. And thank you. This was absolutely lovely.
Yeah, it was fun. It was great. Thanks for inviting me. Hopefully I haven't upset too many people.
Hopefully not. We'll see what the people in the comments have to say.
I can't wait.
It's gonna be great. But guys, this is actually the last video in the series.
Wow, on your journeys.
On the journey. So I'm not going to be catching you guys anywhere else in America for now, but this was a great time, and I will catch you somewhere else in the safari world. You'll see me again, for sure, around, and catch you guys soon.